She was the only black girl in school, and when they locked her in a gym locker to silence her, what they didn't know was she was a black belt in karate. What happened next turned a quiet freshman into the voice that changed the entire school. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. Zuri Ellis stepped off the charter bus and into Willowbrook High's manicured courtyard under a sky that felt too perfect, bright, unblemished, and uncomfortably still. She instinctively hugged her thin messenger bag tighter, the fabric pressing against the curve of the black belt she'd hidden beneath her jacket. No one knew about her years of martial arts training, or the power she carried behind those steady eyes. Today, she would remain invisible until she chose otherwise. The first bell echoed, and clusters of students freshly minted in their tight-knit cliques streamed toward the building. Zuri stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling the collective gaze sharpen around her. Whispers hovered in the air, fractured sentences caught midair, new kid looks, different, she's in track. She calculated each step forward, measuring the distance between them and her soft sneakers. Curiosity was one thing, hostility another. Inside the entryway, the walls gleamed with trophy plaques, varsity banners, and the faces of students who had conquered regional championships. Zuri traced a fingertip on the cold tile, imagining how many stories lay behind those smiles, stories of belonging she would never claim until she forged her own. With a deep breath that trembled and calmed in the same instant she stepped through the doors. In the hallway, she paused at her locker, a dull metal rectangle among 1,000 others. She spun the dial with casual precision. Yo's 2, 19, 7, her grandmother's birthday. The crack of its opening echoed like an overture in the empty corridor, but within the echo lingered expectation. Who would this new girl become? Would she crumble, like the whispered rumors foretold? Her first class was English, with Mrs. Davenport, a tall woman with sharp glasses and an even sharper gaze. Zuri slid into the back row, hoping to blend. A nearby boy tensed, sending a ripple of attention her way. She caught his name tag briefly, Bryce Horton, leader of the football herd. They exchanged nothing but air and suspicion. She returned her gaze to the front, pretending the weight of their scrutiny didn't dwell on her shoulders like an uninvited shadow. Lunchtime arrived like a slow-moving wave. Zuri carried her lunch tray, salad, fruit, water to the cafeteria. Tables stretched in regimented patterns, seats were claimed before trays touched plates. She scanned for an open space and found one at the edge next to an empty seat as if it was waiting just for her. Choosing this seat was an act of quiet defiance. She set the tray down and tore into her sandwich, each bite measured. Her calm exterior was a mask. Internally, she cataloged faces. Connor smirking while scrolling his phone. Jace leaning back with bored disdain. Bryce's voice in mid-mockery to someone she couldn't see. She didn't flinch. She wouldn't. She allowed herself a momentary glance at the sky, visible through the high windows. You can do this, she told herself. You can wait. You can adapt. You can watch. Gym class was scheduled right after lunch, and Zuri's heart hammered as she navigated toward the locker rooms. She slipped behind a row of lockers, changed into her athletic wear without drawing attention. The coach barked warm-ups the same way she did control your body, control your breath. But here, the echoes around her weren't reassurance. Every sprint, every stretch was underscored by voices. Think she's any good? Bet she can't even finish 4 laps. Every comment chipped at the surface, but she kept going. She ran not just for fitness, but to reinforce resilience. When the drill ended, she clutched for water at the water fountain. Her throat burned. At that moment, Bryce and 2 others, the same faces from lunch, approached. Bryce reached the fountain before her, then deliberately stepped aside. Zuri tried to squeeze by, but Bryce blocked her path. He leaned in, eyes cold. "Hey, new girl," he said through clenched teeth. "Cool belt. You hiding something?" There was no humor in his tone. The words carried a threat. She stared back, unblinking. "It's just a belt," she replied softly. He stepped closer. Too close. Zuri's muscles tensed. Instinct hissed in her bloodstream, but she said nothing. She sipped her water. When she straightened, Bryce was gone. His emptiness behind vanished like he'd never been there at all. That afternoon, she stood in the library after school, researching historical accounts for her first English assignment. The hush of turning pages and quiet typing was a balm. She was only halfway through a Nicholas Sparks novel when someone slid into the seat beside her. Zuri looked up. It was Kayla Reeves, a junior from her joint math class. Kayla's dark hair was pulled back. Her eyes held surprise more than judgment. "Hi," Kayla said, voice low. You're new. I thought you were mean or something, but you're quiet." Zuri offered a small smile. A start. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Quiet's safe," she admitted. Kayla nodded, picking a word from the air. "Safe." Zuri watched Kayla weigh it. Then Kayla said, "If you ever want company, I eat here." She slid a napkin across the table toward Zuri. Zuri's throat tightened. "Thank you," she said, sincerity softening her voice. The next morning, the hallways felt different, less like a gauntlet, more like a tentative opening. Kayla sat at the edge of the lunch table as Zuri approached, earning a brief, genuine smile from the others. Not loud or triumphant, but it felt revolutionary. Step by measured step, she was making her own mark. Still at night, when she lay in the silence of her small room in suburban Wilmington, Delaware, she opened the drawer beneath her bed and touched the black belt hidden inside. She relived the first day of martial arts training that her father had made her attend at age 8, the pride she'd felt when earning her first stripe, the discipline taught and trust built. Tonight, she whispered, "I'm a storm." In the days that followed, the cafeteria grew less hostile. The hallway corners were lighter. Yet for every moment of calm, there remained the scratch of potential threats, locker room laughter stray looks. Still, she moved through them like ice on winter water, steady and unbroken. That weekend, she visited the Delaware Art Museum and stood before a painting of a hurricane-tossed coastline. Waves crashed and roiled in vivid color, whitecaps exploding in soft spray. A storm could be beautiful. It could be devastating. And from inside, it held immense power. Zuri took a deep breath and touched the protective glass with her fingertip. "Quiet storms can roar," she whispered to herself, feeling the spark of something electric inside her chest. Monday brought new certainty. She would not be invisible. She would wait, read the room, test the rules, prepare her response. She would adapt. She would endure. But she would never be broken. Quiet storm arrives. The headline she wasn't writing, but living. And everyone around her would come to learn When calm hides power, the storm that follows is unstoppable. The silence in Willowbrook High's corridors had a strange quality after that first week, one not born of peace, but of anticipation, like the pause before thunder cracks through a still sky. Zuri Ellis walked those hallways with the kind of grace that made people look twice, even if they didn't understand why. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but her presence had begun to disrupt the unspoken hierarchy of the school. And disruption, even quiet, calculated disruption, never went unnoticed for long. By the second week, the whispers had changed. They weren't just about the new black girl. They carried a tone: unease, incredulity, challenge. "She's too calm," Bryce Morrison muttered in the locker room, yanking his jersey over his head with more force than necessary. "Doesn't flinch, doesn't talk. Thinks she's better than us." Ryan Prescott leaned back against the bench, tossing a football from hand to hand. "I don't like it. People are watching her like she's interesting or dangerous," Tyler Grant added with a smirk. It didn't take long for the three of them to hatch something. They didn't talk plans in full sentences, just fragments, nods, code words exchanged between sets at the gym during lunch behind the bleachers. It was the same kind of language their fathers had taught them. Intimidation masked as tradition. Control masked as confidence. And to them, Zuri was a challenge to both. On a cool Thursday morning, the boys planted their seed. Zuri's locker was dented. Not damaged enough to call security, but enough to leave a message. Her books were rearranged. Her schedule was altered. Subtle infractions. Enough to make someone question their own memory. Enough to throw a person off balance. But Zuri didn't flinch. She noticed the changes marked them down in a mental ledger. And when Kayla Reeves asked her if she was okay, Zuri just smiled and said, "It's just noise." Still, the air around her was changing. The locker rooms grew colder. The cafeteria grew quieter when she entered. She saw the glances, furtive, calculating. Teachers didn't notice, or chose not to. And Zuri began to feel the chill of something deeper than bullying, something that clawed at history and buried itself in whispers. The plan unfolded on a Monday. Zuri's last class ended late, and she headed toward the gym to retrieve the math notebook she had accidentally left on the bleachers. The gym was dark by then, except for one overhead light flickering like a warning. She entered cautiously, her steps echoing on the polished floor. At first it seemed empty. Then she saw them, Bryce, Ryan, and Tyler, standing near the locker room entrance, back straight, eyes unreadable. "We thought you'd be here," Bryce said, voice flat. Zuri didn't respond. She measured the room, the distance between them, the exit behind her. "We want to talk," Ryan said, stepping forward. "About what?" she asked calmly. "You don't belong here," Tyler said. Zuri blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. "Define here. In this school. In our space. You walk around like you own it, like you're better," Bryce snapped. "I walk like I've earned my place," Zuri said. That was the spark. Ryan lunged first, not to hit, but to grab. Zuri stepped back, turning sideways, letting him lose his balance. But the trap had already been laid. From behind, Tyler swept a gym mat across the floor. And in a single choreographed motion, the three of them pushed her arms restrained toward the locker room. She struggled, but not wildly. Not yet. The training drilled into her since childhood held her back. Assess, breathe, anticipate. But they were faster prepared. They shoved her toward a tall metal equipment locker, the kind used to store spare uniforms and gear. She twisted, tried to break free, but the weight of three bodies pushed her in hard. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her. Outside, Bryce twisted the latch and padlocked it. They didn't laugh. This wasn't a prank. It was a punishment. They didn't know who they had just locked in. Inside, Zuri exhaled slowly. The metal walls closed in tight. The air smelled of sweat and disinfectant. It was nearly impossible to move, but she wasn't panicking. Not yet. She closed her eyes and drew herself inward, into the rhythm of her breath, into the memory of Sensei Camille's voice during a stormy night at the dojo. Stillness is not surrender. It is strategy. Hours passed. She felt time shift not through light, but by the ache in her muscles, the sting of hunger, the numbness in her legs. She tried yelling once early on, just to measure the sound. It bounced uselessly. No one heard. Or maybe no one cared. So she waited. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She listened. She remembered. She recalled her father's face when she'd earned her black belt. His pride. His quiet words. They'll try to trap you in all kinds of boxes, Zuri, but you're built to break them. When the school lights dimmed outside and the echo of distant footsteps told her the building was nearly empty, she began to prepare. She ran her fingers along the edge of the locker door. Rusted in spots. Hinges loose near the bottom. She stretched slowly, painfully toward the edge, with her foot using every ounce of balance her training had taught her. A plan began to take shape in her mind. She knew this wasn't the moment she'd break free. Not yet. But she knew she would. And when she did, she wouldn't just walk out of that locker, she'd bring the whole story with her. Because some shadows don't stay in hallways. They follow. They grow. But Zuri Ellis was not afraid of shadows. She was built to step through them and into the light. The first thing Zuri Ellis lost was the sense of time. There was no light to guide her, no clock to read. Only the muffled noises of a school winding down, then falling silent. The metallic confinement pressed around her like a vice breathing stale air into her lungs. She had endured physical strain before tournaments, broken fingers, endless hours in training. But this was different. This was psychological warfare, an erasure of space of dignity of being seen. But Zuri had learned from an early age that the world wouldn't always see her unless she forced it to. The locker was not just a prison, it was a test, and she was prepared to pass it. She focused first on her breathing. Sensei Camille had taught her that the mind collapses faster than the body. Keep the mind strong, and the body will follow. Inhale 4 counts. Hold. Exhale 4 counts. Let the darkness become an ally, not a threat. She pressed her palms lightly against the sides, assessing. Each inch of the locker became a map she mentally charted. She could feel a slight weakness in the bottom panel. It groaned differently under pressure, thinner, maybe dented from previous use. Her toes flexed, tracing the seam. It would be a long shot, but long shots were better than none. She shifted her weight slightly, just enough to maneuver her foot into a brace against the side panel. The angle was brutal. Her hamstrings screamed, her knees knocked into cold steel. She twisted again, nudging her shoulder down to the bottom. With slow, controlled effort, she began to test pressure points with her heel, sending vibrations through the metal. Outside, the school remained quiet. The lights had dimmed into their nighttime mode. Custodians had made their rounds. The security guard had likely gone home, or at best made a cursory check. She would not be found by luck. She would have to make her own way out. Memories came in waves, as if her subconscious chose this moment to remind her of all the times she'd been cornered, not physically, but emotionally, socially. The girls who looked at her hair and asked if they could touch it. The teachers who assumed she needed extra help before she opened her mouth. The whispered jokes, the forced smiles, the feeling of never being fully welcome. It had always been a quiet kind of violence, subtle enough to ignore, persistent enough to leave scars. But this was no longer quiet. This was deliberate. That truth lit something in her chest. Anger, yes, but also resolve. She took a breath, shifted her position, then drove her heel into the bottom seam with as much force as her position allowed. A soft creak rewarded her. She paused, adjusted, and hit again, then again. The pain shot through her legs, but she kept going. Hours must have passed. Her muscles burned. Her throat ached. But finally, the seam at the bottom gave way, slightly enough for her to catch the inner lip with her heel and wedge her foot inside. Slowly, she pushed, grinding it open, inch by inch. And then at last, with a loud metallic pop, the bottom panel gave way. Zuri collapsed onto the gym floor like a wave breaking on the shore. She lay there, gasping, her limbs trembling, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. The air was cold against her sweat-soaked shirt, but she was free. She sat up slowly. The gym was dark, but moonlight streamed through the high windows, casting silver shadows on the floor. She was still alone. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stood. And then she walked each step, slow, deliberate, as if reclaiming ownership of her own body, her own story. She reached the hallway and slipped into the shadows, bypassing cameras and noise just as her training had taught her. At home, her parents were asleep, unaware of the battle their daughter had just fought. She didn't wake them. Instead, she went into the basement, into the makeshift dojo her father had built years ago when they lived in Chicago. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection lit only by the dim overhead bulb. She stared at her bruised arms, her scraped knees, the mark left by the latch on her cheek. Then she bowed. Because to her, this wasn't defeat. It was initiation. The next morning, Zuri returned to school. No fanfare, no complaint. She walked past the very boys who had trapped her. They smirked. They assumed silence meant weakness. But Zuri wasn't silent out of fear. She was silent out of strategy. Because now, she wasn't just the new girl. She was the storm they didn't see coming. And the reckoning would come. Not with violence, but with precision, with purpose, with truth. And when it came, they wouldn't even know what hit them. Because while they had trapped a girl in a locker, what they unleashed was a warrior. Zuri Ellis didn't seek revenge. She sought clarity. The locker incident had not broken her, it had sharpened her. Now she moved through the school, not as a ghost in the background, but as a quiet observer with a purpose. Every hallway glance, every whispered joke from Blake, Ryan, and Tyler became another thread in the web she was weaving. She didn't need to shout her power. She knew the storm she carried within was already in motion. Her plan began with presence. She rejoined extracurricular activities, walked confidently into her classes, and raised her hand more often. Teachers began to notice her academic precision. Students, initially skeptical, grew curious. Rumors had swirled for weeks. No one quite knew where she had gone during the locker incident, and she hadn't spoken a word about it. She wasn't interested in sympathy. She wanted accountability. Zuri started documenting everything. She kept a journal with timestamps, incidents, subtle harassment. She even recorded audio with a discreet mic clipped to her backpack. The bullies remained smug, unaware of her growing case file. But it wasn't just about exposure. Zuri knew public humiliation could backfire. What she needed was transformation of perception of power. She turned to her strength martial arts. During lunch breaks, she asked the principal if she could use the gym for meditation and physical health. With reluctance, he agreed. Alone in the gym, Zuri moved through kata like poetry in motion. Her strikes were swift, her footwork graceful. The janitor, Mr. Greeley, sometimes peeked in, watching with astonishment. She never explained. Let the silence do the talking. Soon word spread. One day, Ava Chen, a student from her literature class, asked shyly if Zuri could teach her how to defend herself. She had been shoved in the hallway last week by a jock who said it was just a joke. Zuri nodded. That Friday, 2 more girls joined. The next week, there were 8. Without permission or fanfare, Zuri started something new. A self-defense circle led by the girl no one had seen coming. Meanwhile, the boys remained unchanged. Blake still strutted down the halls like he owned the place. Ryan threw careless insults when teachers weren't listening. Tyler, slightly quieter, kept his cruelty hidden behind sarcasm. Zuri watched them, not with hatred, but with strategy. The moment came when Blake cornered another freshman by the vending machines. Zuri stepped in, not with a fight, but with a question. What's your goal here, Blake? He blinked, caught off guard. What, you're about to shove someone half your size. Why? You feel bigger when someone else feels small. The hallway went quiet. Students turned. Blake scoffed and walked away muttering. But a shift had begun. Ryan tried to bait her in class. Hey, Ellis, that black belt of yours teach you how to cry in a locker? The class chuckled. Zuri smiled. Actually, it taught me how to recognize fear in people pretending to be strong. Her voice was calm. The teacher didn't say a word. But Ryan didn't laugh again that day. It wasn't about takedowns. It was about dismantling a system of silence. Tyler was last. One afternoon, Zuri found him sitting alone behind the auditorium. She approached quietly. He didn't flinch. You here to gloat? No, she said. I'm here because you haven't said a word. Not like the others. Tyler looked down. I didn't stop them either. That's worse, she said, not unkindly, because you knew better. He nodded. I didn't think it would go that far. It did. They sat in silence. And then, without prompting, Tyler spoke again. I heard about what you're doing. The self-defense stuff. I think it's good. They need it. She asked, raising a brow. We, he corrected. We all do. That was the moment Zuri knew change wasn't about crushing your enemies. It was about revealing them to themselves. By the end of the semester, the principal was forced to address the bullying incident publicly. A teacher had seen Zuri's locker bent from the inside and brought it to the school board. Pressure mounted. Zuri never had to say a word. The board called her in for a statement. She brought her journal, her audio clips, and calmly laid them out. There was no anger in her voice, just truth. And truth, when spoken without fear, has a power that no punch could match. Zuri Ellis had not sought to destroy. She had sought to illuminate. And in doing so, she'd changed everything. Spring bloomed across the campus of Greenridge High, and with it, a change far deeper than the turning of seasons. The air felt lighter, not because the hallways had rid themselves of cruelty entirely, but because silence had been shattered. And in its place, something stronger began to grow. Zuri Ellis walked those same halls now with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. The girl they once tried to break was now the anchor of a quiet revolution. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. Her presence had become its own kind of language, a reminder that resilience is not loud, but unshakable. The self-defense group she had started unofficially now had a designated space in the school gym, recognized as an after-school club with faculty support. What began with a few uncertain students had swelled into a group of more than 20. They weren't just learning to fight. They were learning to stand tall, to trust their instincts to speak, even when the world told them to stay silent. Zuri had been offered the role of club president, but she declined. "Let someone else lead," she said. "The next voice matters just as much as mine." It was Ava Chen who took up the role, a once shy girl who now spoke with clarity and fire. Under her guidance, the club drafted an open letter that called on the school board to implement stricter anti-bullying policies and invest in restorative justice training for faculty. The letter, signed by over 200 students, went viral on social media. Parents and teachers took notice. Meanwhile, the boys who once ruled the social food chain had changed in different ways. Blake, once defiant, was removed from the varsity football team after a disciplinary review. Ryan faced mandatory counseling after his comments, and actions were logged officially. Tyler surprisingly asked to speak at one of the self-defense sessions. His voice trembled, but he admitted publicly, "I stood by when I should have stood up. I won't make that mistake again." Some clapped, others stayed quiet. Zuri simply nodded. Growth is never clean, but it matters when it starts. The most unexpected turn came during the school's end-of-year assembly. The principal, under pressure from the district, made a formal statement. He acknowledged the failures of oversight and the long-standing culture of favoritism and silence. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. And then he invited Zuri to the stage. She didn't prepare a speech. She walked calmly to the microphone, looked out at the crowd of students, some curious, some ashamed, some grateful, and she said, "What you choose to see matters, but what you choose to do matters more." She thanked her mentors, her peers, her attackers, not with forgiveness, but with a reminder, "You taught me what I will never become." Zuri didn't cry that day, but many others did. As she stepped down, something intangible followed her respect. Not fear, not pity, but genuine earned admiration. She graduated a few weeks later with honors and a scholarship to study sociology and criminal justice. Before leaving, she left one final note on the bulletin board outside the gym. Power is not in silence. Power is in knowing when to speak and when to rise. Greenridge High would never be the same again, and neither would the girl they once tried to silence. Zuri Ellis's story is not just one of survival. It is a declaration of identity resilience and quiet revolution. What began as a cruel act of bullying driven by ignorance and prejudice transformed into a narrative of power reclaimed and justice quietly but fiercely pursued. Trapped for 12 agonizing hours in a school locker, Zuri could have chosen bitterness. She could have allowed fear or rage to shape her. But instead, she chose clarity, strategy, and ultimately transformation, not just for herself, but for the entire school community. From the moment she walked into Greenridge High, Zuri was an outsider, not only because of her race or her transfer status, but because she carried herself with a strength few could recognize. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was observation. Her calm wasn't compliance, it was calculation. What her bullies didn't know was that beneath the quiet exterior lay a disciplined black belt in karate, a girl trained in both self-control and self-respect. The act of being locked in that locker was meant to humiliate her, to make her small. But Zuri's strength didn't crumble in that darkness, it multiplied. When she emerged, she didn't seek retaliation in the way they expected. She didn't fight back with fists or fury. She fought back with truth, with purpose, and with unshakable presence. She built something lasting: a support circle, a training ground, and a movement. Students who had never felt safe began to speak up. Girls who had accepted cruelty as normal began to question it. Even some of her bullies, confronted with their own reflections, began to change. Not because Zuri forced them to, but because she forced them to see. The lesson here runs deeper than standing up to bullies. It's about the courage to redefine the space you're given. It's about knowing that power isn't always loud, and justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes power is silent, like Zuri moving through a kata in an empty gym. Sometimes justice is slow, like a self-defense class growing from one to many. But it comes, and when it does, it shifts the air. Zuri's legacy wasn't defined by the cruelty she endured. It was defined by the dignity with which she responded to it. She didn't let her trauma become her identity. Instead, she used it as the spark to illuminate injustice, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. So what can we take from this story? First, we are reminded that we all have the capacity to be both survivors and changemakers. What happens to us does not define us. What we do with it does. Whether it's in a school hallway, a workplace, or a public space, when we witness injustice, silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. Speaking up, even quietly, even alone, can spark change far greater than we imagine. Second, this story teaches us that strength looks different for everyone. For some, it's physical power. For others, it's emotional endurance. For many, it's simply staying true to who you are in a world that tries to reshape you. Zuri's martial arts training wasn't just about defense. It was about discipline, identity, and resilience. Whatever your version of that is, whether it's writing, speaking, organizing, or creating, cultivate it. It will serve you in ways you never expect. Finally, Zuri's journey shows us that transformation is possible, not just for the victim, but even for the aggressor. Change takes accountability, discomfort, and time, but when one person stands firm, they can shift the culture around them. What was once a school built on hierarchy and silence became a place where students began to look out for each other, where leadership listened, and where systems started to adjust. This story, like many others we share, is a reminder that hope doesn't come from happy endings. It comes from hard beginnings and the will to keep going anyway. If Zuri's story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of something in your own life, we encourage you to keep that feeling alive. Reflect on how you can use your own voice, however small it feels. Ask yourself, in what spaces do I need to speak up? Where can I help create safer environments for others? And if you believe in the power of stories to create real change, we invite you to support this channel. Subscribe, share, and help us reach others who may need these messages. Every click, every comment, and every share fuels our mission to bring more stories, like Zuri's, into the light, stories that inform, inspire, and ignite action. Together we can build a community where compassion, courage, and justice are not just ideals, but daily practices. Thank you for being part of that journey.